My husband and his friends thought it would be funny to leave me stranded in a small town in Italy after a fight. Let's see how she gets back. They laughed, driving off. I didn't return. A month later, he tracked me down in Greece. I was already starting over. If you are watching this, please hit that like button, subscribe, and mention in the comments where you are watching this from. I would like to know how far my story has reached. Let's see how she manages now, Adrian chuckled, his voice sharp as broken glass, as he slammed the rental car door. The headlights of the car swept briefly across the narrow Italian street before the vehicle sped away, leaving behind only a fading glow and the echo of Adrian's friend's laughter. Dust rose in the air, hanging for a moment before settling on the cobblestones. I stood frozen, mouth still half open from the words I had been about to say. Our argument, which had seemed so urgent and consuming just moments earlier outside that little cafe, was instantly meaningless compared to what he had just done. "He's coming back," I whispered, my voice too thin to convince even myself. Locals sitting at outdoor tables nearby paused mid-conversation to glance at me, their forks hovering in the air. The knot in my stomach wound tighter as the minutes dragged on, stretching into an hour. Shadows lengthened over the foreign town whose name I couldn't even pronounce correctly. When I had begged Adrian not to drink so much at lunch, I never could have imagined things would spiral this far. His old college friends, men who thrived on childish dares and reunions that grew messier each year, had pushed him. I'd been reluctantly invited to join their guys' trip, and I regretted it from the start. "Always keeping him on a leash, aren't you?" Owen had joked, ordering another round of drinks when I suggested we should head back to the hotel. When I stood to leave, Adrian stumbled after me. His words were slurred, but his anger cut through cleanly. Resentments that had been simmering for years boiled up fast. "Your purse has your passport, doesn't it?" he smeared, climbing into the driver's seat. "Then you'll figure it out. You're so clever, always telling me what to do." And then he drove away. By the time night settled fully, the little Italian town that had looked so charming in daylight now seemed threatening. I pulled out my wallet and counted, €80 and 37 American dollars. Barely enough for food and a night or two somewhere cheap. Definitely not enough for a plane ticket home. My credit cards were useless. Adrian had them in his wallet. He'd offered to carry them earlier when I couldn't fit them in my bag, and I hadn't thought twice. I found a dingy room above a bakery, the only place cheap enough for me to afford. The walls were yellowed with age, the bed a narrow cot, and the sink dripped steadily into a cracked porcelain basin. The elderly woman who showed me the room spoke no English, but her sympathetic look as she patted my arm told me she understood more than I wished she did. "He blocked me," I whispered in disbelief, staring at my phone. I had called Adrian 27 times. Every attempt went straight to voicemail. My texts showed as delivered, but unanswered. I tried Owen, then Michael, then every one of Adrian's friends who had been in that car. Each call failed. They had all blocked me. The realization made me shiver. This wasn't a drunken impulse. This was planned, deliberate. A humiliation fought up and carried out with laughter. Sleep that night came in scraps, broken by jolts awake when I checked my phone again, praying for a message that never came. By morning, I convinced myself Adrian would return. He'd show up, acting wounded that I hadn't understood his joke, insisting I had overreacted. I imagined myself angry, yes, but relieved enough to get into the car and move forward, back into our carefully constructed life in Boston. There, he was the respected architect, and I was the accommodating wife who had quietly abandoned her own design career to manage his social calendar and keep our home running like clockwork. But Adrian didn't come. On the second day, I rationed the little money I had left, a panini for lunch, a cheap bottle of water. I circled the town, peering into restaurants and hotels, searching for any trace of their group. By evening, I realized they had continued on with their trip, likely in Florence by now, leaving me a ghost in this place. On the third day, A kind cafe owner noticed me hovering too long outside his shop. He pressed a free espresso into my hands and gave me directions, in broken English, to the local police station. The officer listened patiently, but it was clear he'd heard stories like mine before. His English was barely better than my non-existent Italian. He filed a report, nodded sympathetically, and sent me on my way. Nothing more. That afternoon, I made the hardest decision of my life. I stood in front of a cramped pawn shop, my wedding ring heavy on my finger. It was the 2-carat diamond Adrian had upgraded to on our 5th anniversary, replacing the simple band we had started with. A symbol of a promise already shattered. With trembling hands, I twisted it off and slid it across the counter. "You call America family?" the pawnbroker asked kindly, counting out the euros. I nodded, but inside, I already knew I wouldn't. Family meant explaining. It meant hearing my mother's sharp "I told you so" about Adrian's temper. It meant facing friends who had already seen the cracks in our marriage, cracks I had covered over desperately for years. At the bus station, I stared at the electronic board, flashing names of cities I had only read about in glossy magazines. Rome, Naples, Venice, ferries to islands, buses stretching into the night. My thumb hovered over my father's name in my phone contacts. One call, and he'd wire money for a ticket home. One call, and I'd be back in Boston, back in the life where I had made myself small enough to fit inside Adrian's shadow. A memory surfaced uninvited. Adrian hiding my design portfolios one evening when I had talked about working again. "Why complicate things?" he had said smoothly. "We don't need the money. I need you focused on us." I'd laughed it off then, dismissing the unease. But standing in that grimy station, the truth was sharp and undeniable. That wasn't love. That was control. "Where you go?" the ticket agent asked, her kind eyes studying me as I lingered far too long. "Greece," I blurted, the word cementing itself as soon as it left my lips. "The furthest coastal village you can get me to." 14 hours later, stiff from cramped bus seats, I stepped into a small Greek village by the sea. Whitewashed buildings clustered together, their blue shutters bright in the sun. The smell of salt water and olive groves filled the air. My phone battery had long since died. My stomach was hollow. My body felt hollow too, scraped out by fear and adrenaline. But as I watched the sunset streak the Aegean waters in pink and gold, something shifted inside me. Adrian had tried to teach me a lesson about dependence. Instead, he had set me free. The Greek sun bore down mercilessly as I wandered beyond the village. My sandals, chosen for sightseeing rather than walking, rubbed raw blisters into my feet. My water bottle had been empty for hours. Hunger, exhaustion, and despair made the world tilt strangely, like I was seeing it from underwater. Silver-green trees shimmered in the hot breeze. Olive groves, I realized dimly, just before my knees gave way. The ground rushed up, and I collapsed without even lifting my hands to break the fall. Darkness blurred the edges of my vision, but a curious calm settled in my chest. Perhaps this was how it ended. Abandoned by my husband in one country, only to die, alone and nameless, in another. A voice broke through the haze. "Copiste! Wait!" Weathered hands turned me onto my back. I blinked against the light and saw a face hovering above me, deeply lined, framed by a scarf. Kind eyes, wide with worry. She spoke rapidly in Greek, her words like a melody I couldn't understand. "Elena," she said finally, tapping her chest. I whispered hoarsely, "Clara." My name came out fractured, but she seemed to understand. She lifted a canteen to my lips. The water was lukewarm, but life itself. I drank greedily, coughing halfway through, but strength returned enough to sit up. Elena gripped my arm with surprising strength, urging me toward a farmhouse nestled among the olive trees. Inside, the kitchen smelled of thyme and rosemary strung from wooden beams. Something simmered on a stove so old, it looked like it had belonged to her grandmother's grandmother. She eased me into a chair at the scarred wooden table. Elena? Another voice called, a man's this time. Moments later, he appeared in the doorway, an elderly man with sun-darkened skin and a silver mustache. He wiped his hands on a cloth, his eyes wary but not unfriendly. Nikos, Elena said, gesturing to him. He nodded once, still cautious. Elena poured a glass of cool water and pressed it into my trembling hands. Then she set down a bowl of soup, simple but fragrant. My stomach growled loudly, to my own embarrassment. And she smiled at the sound. That evening blurred into broken sentences, hand gestures, and tears. I tried to explain, stumbling through the story in fragments they couldn't fully understand. But somehow, Elena seemed to grasp enough, not the details, but the pain. Nikos listened in silence, occasionally asking questions his wife translated through gestures. When they offered me a small spare room, I didn't resist, too tired to argue, too drained to care. The bed was narrow, the quilt handmade. I collapsed and sank into the first real sleep I'd had in days. Morning came with roosters crowing and the smell of fresh bread. At the foot of my bed, folded neatly, were clothes, a simple cotton dress and a cardigan, clearly decades old but freshly laundered. They hung loosely on me, but felt like a gift. Downstairs, Elena beamed when she saw me. She poured coffee thick as tar and served bread drizzled with olive oil and honey. My cheeks warmed with shame as I realized how much they had done for me already. Fed me, clothed me, sheltered me. Through a translation app on my newly charged phone, I tried to explain my gratitude. I will leave soon. I don't want to burden you. Elena's expression shifted instantly. She shook her head firmly, pointing toward the rain streaking the window, then down to my blistered feet. Stay, she said, one of the few English words she clearly knew. Rest. For 3 days, every attempt I made to leave was gently intercepted. Once, with my shoes on and purse in hand, I reached the door, only for Elena to step in front of me, her expression so pained it stopped me cold. She took me by the hand and guided me to the mantel. From a small wooden box, she pulled out a stack of photographs. She tapped one, a young woman with Elena's eyes and Nikos's smile. Sophia, she whispered. Then she gestured outward as if far away. Australia. Her eyes glistened as she cradled her arms like rocking a baby, then lowered her hand to indicate a child's height. Grandchild, she managed to say in English, pointing to a newer photo of an infant. And then I understood. Their daughter lived half a world away. Their grandchild, too. In me, Elena saw a stand-in for the daughter she missed so painfully. Rather than feeling used, I felt my heart ache for her. I set my purse back down on its hook. From that moment, my days began to follow the rhythms of their life. Elena showed me how to gather eggs from the chickens without making them panic, how to hang laundry so the mountain breeze caught it just right. Nikos taught me which weeds to pull from the vegetable garden. At first, my body resisted. My hands, used to occasional gym sessions and curated routines, blistered and burned. My muscles ached each night, but the ache was grounding, real. And slowly the storm in my mind quieted. The constant replay of Adrian's betrayal, the endless what-ifs and whys, faded beneath the simpler concerns of daily labor, of learning how to say thank you properly in Greek, of mastering the difference between weeds and herbs. Evenings became my favorite time. Elena would knit by the small porch, Nikos would puff on his pipe, and I would sit with them in silence. Not the suffocating silence of my marriage, but a peaceful one. The betrayal still cut deep, but here, under olive trees that had stood for centuries, I began to see it less as an ending and more as the beginning of something uncharted. 2 weeks after arriving, Elena and I sat shelling peas at the kitchen table. She studied me for a long time before asking, slowly in her improving English, "Home? You want go home?" She mimed a plane flying across the sky, then pointed to America. The word home hit me like a stone. I pictured the Boston brownstone with its designer furniture. I pictured Adrian, his controlling habits cloaked as care. His management of our finances that left me without access, his subtle dismissals of my friendships, his easy laughter at the expense of my career. Tears welled and spilled before I could stop them. The words tumbled out, not in Greek, but raw emotion crossing the barrier. I told her everything. About Adrian's cruelty, about years of giving up pieces of myself to keep peace, about the humiliation of being abandoned like an unwanted object. Elena covered my hand with hers as I spoke, her eyes deep with understanding, even if the words slipped past her. When I finished, she tapped her chest, then pointed at the farm, then at me. The message was unmistakable. You have a place here, if you want it. I swallowed, wiped my face, and nodded. Work, I said carefully, gesturing toward Nikos tending the olive trees outside. I stay, I work. Elena's smile bloomed like the sun rising over the hills. She squeezed my hand and returned to the peas, as if we had just agreed on tomorrow's dinner rather than a new direction for my life. The very next morning, she shook me awake while the stars were still fading. She handed me clothes once belonging to Sophia and sturdy boots. Half asleep, I followed her and Nikos to the grove, where the first blush of dawn painted the trees. Elias, Elena said, pointing at the branches heavy with fruit. She demonstrated the technique, gently combing the branches with a wooden rake so the olives fell onto nets below. My first attempt sent more twigs and leaves down than olives. Nikos corrected me with quiet patience. By midday my shoulders ached and my hands throbbed, but I had gathered enough to feel pride. At lunch, Elena examined my palms, laughing softly. Boston lady hands, she teased, before spreading a homemade salve that smelled of rosemary and beeswax across the blisters. Tomorrow, better, she promised, and she was right. Each day, I grew stronger. Each day. The piles of olives grew higher, and with them, my confidence. Harvesting the olives was only the beginning. Once they were collected, the sorting began. An even more demanding process. Under the shade of a pergola, the three of us sat at a long wooden table, separating the perfect fruit from the blemished. The finest olives would be pressed into premium oil, the slightly bruised into second-grade batches, and the damaged ones reserved for soap making. At first, my eyes couldn't tell the difference. Elena's sharp gaze corrected me with a shake of her head or a gentle tap to my wrist. Nikos occasionally murmured a few words in Greek, guiding me. Slowly, the distinctions became clearer. I could see what they saw. The shine, the firmness, the subtle flaws. You learn quick, Nikos said one evening, his English halting but sincere. It was the highest compliment he'd given me yet. My chest warmed with pride. My education expanded beyond the groves. In Elena's kitchen, I faced challenges that humbled me in new ways. Back in Boston, I had considered myself a decent cook. I could follow a glossy magazine recipe well enough to impress Adrian's colleagues at dinner parties. But here, Elena cooked without measurements, without recipes at all, only memory, instinct, and inherited knowledge. Look, she would say, kneading dough for bread, her hands moving with the ease of years. I tried to mimic her, and my first attempts were disasters. Misshapen loaves emerged from the stone oven, underbaked in the center or charred to black on the edges. Practice, Elena encouraged, tearing apart the worst of them to taste regardless. Learning is never waste. Her acceptance of imperfection startled me. In my old life, mistakes were things to hide, flaws to erase. But here, they were part of the process. The food itself was startling in its simplicity and richness. Vegetables pulled from the soil hours before. Eggs still warm from the coop. Cheese from goats down the road. Nothing processed, nothing packaged in plastic. Just olive oil, lemon, herbs, and fire. My body responded in ways I hadn't expected. The clothes I had arrived in grew loose as pounds slipped away, not from dieting, but from work that demanded strength. Calluses toughened my hands. My skin, once dependent on expensive creams, glowed from nothing more than olive oil soap and sweat. When I caught sight of myself in the bathroom's small mirror, I hardly recognized the woman looking back. She was leaner, stronger, sun-browned, not polished, not perfected, but solid in a way I had never been before. As my Greek improved, Elena and I could finally speak more freely. She showed me photo albums, black and white images of her youth in the village. I learned she had once been a teacher before she married and returned to help with her family's olive groves. "You?" she asked one evening, miming typing on a keyboard. I hesitated, then showed her photos on my phone of the design projects I had worked on before marrying Adrian, interiors I had created for clients, all sleek lines and warm colors. "Beautiful," Elena said, tapping her temple, thinking. Her validation, so simple and sincere, brought tears to my eyes. Adrian had never praised my work, always brushing it off as a hobby. Elena, in a single word, gave me back something I hadn't realized I'd lost. On rainy afternoons, she taught me to knit. My first scarf was uneven, lumpy, a mess of dropped stitches, but mine. Nikos, in turn, taught me to shape clay on a wheel, guiding my clumsy hands until a crooked mug emerged. Each item I made felt more precious than anything I had ever bought. Months passed, 3 of them before I even realized. One morning, Elena and Nikos led me to their small pressing shed. Inside, bottles of golden green oil gleamed on shelves. "Market day," Elena said, pointing to the calendar. The village square bustled with energy that weekend. Farmers and artisans filled stalls with bread, cheeses, woven baskets, pottery. Elena and Nikos arranged their table with bottles of oil, bars of olive soap, and jars of preserved olives. To my surprise, they positioned me at the front, urging me to talk with customers. My Greek was clumsy, my confidence unsteady, but people smiled and laughed at my attempts. We sold steadily all day. At the end, Elena pressed an envelope into my hand. "Your part," she said simply. "Fair work, fair pay." I stared at the money. It wasn't much by Boston standards, barely enough for a meal at one of the restaurants Adrian and I used to frequent. But it was more valuable than any paycheck I'd ever received. It was mine, earned, not handed to me, not controlled by someone else. That night, I tucked the envelope under my pillow, reaching to touch it again and again, as though to reassure myself it was real. In 10 years of marriage, Adrian had taken over our finances entirely. He told me it was easier, simpler, that he'd handle things, and I had let him. This stack of euros, modest as it was, represented my first true independence in years. The following week, Elena and Nikos invited me to the taverna in the village square. Dressed in a blouse borrowed from Elena, I followed them nervously inside. The owner, Stavros, greeted them with booming affection before turning curious eyes on me. "Our American," Elena said proudly. Stavros smiled warmly and ushered us to a table that seemed to be theirs by habit. Plates of grilled fish and tumblers of wine arrived quickly. Halfway through the meal, Nikos cleared his throat. "Clara," he said carefully, his English deliberate. "We want talk business." My heart sank. Had I overstayed? Was it time to move on? Elena reached across the table, patting my hand. "We old now," she said, pointing between herself and her husband. 68, 70. Sophia not here. No children. Nikos nodded gravely. 2, 3 years. We stop. But olive trees, he gestured broadly. They live 200 years. Need young hands. I stared, understanding it was dawning slowly. "You learn fast. You work hard," Elena added, her eyes crinkling with her smile. "We teach, then business yours." I nearly choked on my wine. They were offering me their livelihood, their legacy. Me, a stranger who had stumbled into their lives months ago. "But I don't know enough," I stammered. "The trees, the pressing, the business." "You learn," Nikos said firmly. "No rush." That night marked a turning point. I was no longer just an extra pair of hands. I was an apprentice, an heir to something older and steadier than I had ever known. Each morning, Nikos walked me through the groves, explaining the soil, the signs of disease, the timing of harvests. Elena showed me their ledgers. a mix of handwritten notes and clumsy spreadsheets their grandson had once set up. I saw where I could help. Evenings, I digitized their records, showing Elena how to track sales and expenses more clearly. "Look," I said one night, demonstrating how patterns emerged, which varieties sold best, which markets were most profitable. Her eyes widened. "Smart," she nodded. "Boston brain good for business." We updated bottle labels to describe flavors and food pairings. I made a simple brochure for curious tourists. I spoke with local restaurant owners, building connections. Stavros even began offering our premium oil at his taverna tables, proudly displaying the new labels. Word spread. Soon, neighboring towns wanted our oil. 6 months into this new life, I attended the baptism of the butcher's granddaughter. Standing in the back of the small stone church, I watched with tears in my eyes as the priest blessed the baby. Afterward, he greeted me in halting English. "You bring new life to old groves," he said with a twinkle in his eye. "Good for village. Young people leave. Village needs new blood." It felt like a benediction. I was no longer a stranger. I was part of the weave. In the months that followed, I began to weave myself into the rhythms of the village. Yana, a weaver whose stall was beside ours at the market, became one of my first true friends. She was sharp-witted, widowed young, and practical in a way that reminded me of the college roommate I had long since lost touch with. Her English was better than my Greek, and our conversations wandered from market strategies to gossip about neighbors to reflections on life and loss. "You never speak of America," she observed one afternoon as we packed up unsold bottles. "Family there? Friends?" Her question pierced me more deeply than I expected. I realized I had been pushing thoughts of my old life to the corners of my mind. "My parents are gone," I admitted. "I had friends, but Adrian." I trailed off, recognizing too late how thoroughly he had isolated me over the years. He had found ways to dismiss every friend, every colleague, until only he remained at the center of my world. "And the man who left you in Italy?" Yana pressed gently. "You never say his name." "Adrian," I said finally. The syllables felt foreign in my mouth after so many months of silence. "And he never searched for you?" "I don't know," I admitted. I hadn't checked. My phone had become a camera, nothing more. I had abandoned my American email and social media accounts, unwilling to face whatever waited there. Yana raised an eyebrow. "Maybe time to look. Not for him, for you. To close the door." Her words stayed with me. That evening, after helping Elena prepare dinner, I retreated to my room and powered on my phone. It connected to the farmhouse's basic Wi-Fi, and notifications flooded the screen. Hundreds of unread emails. Scanning through them, I saw names from my old life. Friends who had first written casually, then with growing concern. A few had given up, their final messages hanging like unanswered questions. Shame burned in me. I had disappeared from their lives without explanation, just as surely as Adrian had left me behind. Then I saw an email from my former design mentor. "Job opportunity," the subject line read. Curious, I opened the thread. She had recommended me for a remote consulting role with a sustainable building materials company. Her follow-ups grew more urgent, the last one only 2 weeks old. "The job is still available, if I was interested." Before I could process the possibility, another email froze me. From Adrian Lewis, subject, "I know where you are." My stomach dropped. With shaking hands, I opened it. "Clara, it's taken months and a private investigator, but I finally tracked you down in that village in Greece. Enough of this. I'm coming to bring you home. My flight lands in Athens Thursday. Be ready." Thursday, 3 days away. The room spun. He hadn't forgotten me. He hadn't let me go. He was coming to reclaim me like a lost possession. I stumbled downstairs, the phone clutched in my hand. Elena looked up from the ledger spread across the table. Her smile faded when she saw my face. "Bad news?" she asked softly. "Adrian," I whispered. "He's coming here, Thursday." Her eyes narrowed. She reached under the ledger and pulled out an envelope, sliding it toward me. Good timing, then, was waiting for right moment. Inside were legal papers, my name written beside theirs, a partnership agreement, translated in both Greek and English. 1/3 business, Elena explained. Not future, now. Tears blurred my vision. This wasn't just kindness, not just shelter. It was a foundation, a claim, a life. You choose Thursday, Elena said firmly, tapping the papers. You have home here, business here, friends here. Then she gestured at the phone still in my hand. That man, he no longer decides. For the first time since Adrian abandoned me in Italy, I felt anchored. He was coming, but he would find a very different woman. The days passed in a blur. I visited Katerina, the village's lawyer, who helped me draft divorce papers in both languages. I replied to my mentor, tentatively accepting the consulting role. I wrote to the friends I had left behind, offering short, imperfect explanations. Thursday dawned cloudless, the air heavy with the scent of sun-warmed earth. I was in the pressing shed with Nikos, testing samples of oil, when I heard the unfamiliar sound of a car engine. Elena appeared in the doorway. He is here, she said simply. My heart hammered as I stepped outside. Adrian stood beside a sleek silver sedan, designer sunglasses perched on his head. His perfectly tailored outfit screamed money, control, power, the uniform of the man I had once followed without question. He surveyed the farmhouse with visible disdain. He didn't notice me at first. For a moment I studied him the way I might study a stranger, and for the first time, he looked small. Adrian, I called. My voice surprised me with its calm. He turned. Shock flickered across his face. His eyes traveled from my worn boots to my sun-browned skin, lingering on my hair tied back without care. Disbelief warred with recognition. My God, Clara, he said, what happened to you? His tone was familiar, disapproving, laced with superiority. The same tone that had once sent me scrambling to correct myself. Life happened, I said evenly. He extended his arms, his practiced charm sliding into place. I've come to take you home. Enough of this. I stopped, well out of reach. What are you doing here, Adrian? I told you, to bring you back. This tantrum has gone on long enough. This isn't a tantrum, I interrupted. This is a life. Behind me, I heard Elena and Nikos step quietly outside, their presence steady and protective. Adrian noticed them, his smile tightening. These people, they've been holding you here, haven't they? They've been teaching me, I said firmly, about work, about community, about kindness without strings. I gestured toward the groves. I'm part owner now. I have a business here. He laughed, condescending and sharp. A business? Be serious, Clara. You're a designer, not a farmer. This is some fantasy, some phase. Eat, pray, love nonsense. His jaw tightened. I admit, leaving you in Italy was stupid. I was drunk. I've apologized. Let's move past it. When? I demanded. When did you apologize? Was it in the email where you ordered me to be ready to leave, or the months you ignored me completely? He shifted, uncomfortable. Fine, I'm sorry. There. Now can we move on? Why now, Adrian? I pressed. Why look for me after all this time? He sighed, glancing at Elena and Nikos as though embarrassed. Because your absence has caused problems. Your parents called. Friends are asking questions. Clients are wondering why you aren't home. It looks bad for your image, I finished for him. He scowled. Bad for our reputation, our life. The life you built, I shot back. The life where I became nothing but an accessory to your success. Did you even notice how unhappy I was? Did you care? His face hardened. We had a good life, a beautiful home, security, respect. What more could you want? Purpose, connection, control over my choices. I gestured at the farmhouse. I found those here, things you never gave me. This isn't you, he snapped, desperation creeping in. The Clara I know would never choose this. Hard labor, poverty, it's ridiculous. You're right, I said quietly. That Clara wouldn't have, but she's gone. She died the day you drove away laughing. Elena stepped forward then, placing the signed partnership papers in my hand. I unfolded them, holding them where Adrian could see. I'm tied here now. Legally. Financially. By choice. His face reddened. This is insane. Whatever game you're playing. It's not a game, I said, pulling out the divorce papers. These are ready to file. Signed. I don't belong to you anymore. He stared, his expression cycling from shock to fury to wounded pride. You'll regret this, he hissed. When the novelty wears off when you're 60 and still hauling olives in the sun, you'll wish you hadn't thrown everything away. Maybe, I conceded. But I'd rather risk regret from choices I made than live with the certainty of regret from choices made for me. Nikos placed a hand on my shoulder, steady as stone. He spoke in Greek, his tone firm but calm. What did he say? Adrian demanded. He said the road to Athens is dangerous after dark, I translated softly. You should leave now. Adrian's eyes flickered, realizing finally that this was not a negotiation. It was a goodbye. Without another word, he turned and climbed into the car. The divorce papers clutched in his hand trembled slightly as the vehicle roared back down the road. I exhaled, the tension breaking at last. Elena slipped her hand into mine. Together, the three of us turned back toward the farmhouse. My farmhouse. Inside, work awaited. Oil samples to catalog, dinner to prepare, tomorrow's market inventory to check. Adrian had once abandoned me in a foreign country, certain I would crumble, certain I would come crawling back. Instead, he had set me free. The silence after Adrian left felt heavier than his presence had. The car's engine faded into the distance, leaving behind only the cicadas buzzing in the late afternoon heat. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Elena squeezed my hand once before retreating back into the kitchen. Nikos gave my shoulder a firm pat and followed. They knew this moment belonged to me. I stood there, staring at the empty road, realizing it was the first time in years that my future felt entirely mine. No shadow of Adrian leaning over me, no disapproving look to shrink beneath. That night, I slept deeply. Not the exhausted collapse of someone running from pain, but the steady rest of someone who had stopped running altogether. The following days were unremarkable, which was exactly what made them remarkable. I woke to the sound of roosters, worked in the groves, kneaded dough, bottled oil. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, but steady, grounding. Life continued, and this time it was mine. I emailed my mentor again, confirming my commitment to the consulting work. She replied quickly, delighted, attaching files that would allow me to start almost immediately. I arranged a corner of the farmhouse as a workspace. By day, I labored in the groves and kitchen. By night, I reconnected with the part of myself that once thrived on creativity and design. Elena would peek over my shoulder sometimes, watching as I sketched concepts or studied spreadsheets. Smart, she'd say proudly, as if reminding me of something I had forgotten. And maybe she was right. I also began rebuilding bridges to the friends I had abandoned in silence. My emails were short, hesitant, sometimes clumsy. I didn't try to explain everything. How could I? But I offered pieces of myself, honest ones. To my surprise, some of them wrote back, warmly, forgivingly. It felt like the opening notes of a song I hadn't realized I missed. Life in the village deepened. Yana introduced me to more women during her weekly coffee gatherings, where my Greek improved as quickly as my tolerance for strong, gritty coffee. Children began greeting me by name in the streets. Shopkeepers waved. What had started as hospitality gradually became acceptance. One evening, after market day, Stavros pulled me aside at the taverna. "You know," he said in careful English, "you belong here now. Village sees you, not as guest, as one of us." The words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't pity, it wasn't temporary charity. It was belonging. And still, I carried the memory of Adrian's visit like a scar. Not painful, not raw, but present. A reminder. Sometimes at night, I would lie awake wondering what story he was telling now. To his friends, to clients, to himself. Perhaps he painted me as foolish, lost, unstable. Perhaps he told no one, too ashamed of being the man who left his wife in Italy only to have her rise stronger without him. Either way, it no longer mattered. One afternoon, I found myself walking along the grove, sunlight filtering through the leaves, when the thought struck me. I was happy. Not just surviving, not just enduring, but living in a way I hadn't in years. The feeling startled me, then settled over me like a cloak. I thought back to Boston, to the polished home that had once impressed guests but had never felt like mine, to dinner parties where I smiled on cue, to the nights lying awake, shrinking myself smaller and smaller so Adrian's world could expand. And then I thought of the farmhouse, a quilt on my bed, stitched by hands that had known both joy and grief. The cracked mugs in the kitchen, each carrying a story. The olive trees, ancient and rooted, whose fruit sustained us. Here, imperfection was not a flaw. It was life. Months turned into a year. My body adapted fully to the demands of the farm, and my role within the business grew. Tourists began asking for me by name at markets, curious about the American woman who had somehow become part of a Greek olive farm. Elena and Nikos relied on me more each day, their trust evident not only in words but in actions, in the way they stepped back and let me take the lead with customers, in how they handed over tasks they had once guarded closely. The consulting work provided income beyond the farm, enough to give me independence, to save, to plan. I was no longer tethered to survival alone. The divorce finalized quietly. Katerina sent me the official papers with a firm nod of approval. "Clean break," she said simply. Adrian's name looked strange on the documents, like something I had outgrown, a word in a foreign language I no longer needed to use. On the anniversary of my arrival in the village, Elena insisted we host a dinner. Neighbors gathered, filling the farmhouse with laughter, music, and clinking glasses. Nikos roasted lamb over a fire. Yana brought wine. Stavros played his old guitar. At some point in the evening, I slipped outside to the porch. The air was cool, the olive trees dark silhouettes against the fading light. I looked up at the stars, scattered and bright, and let myself breathe in the weight of it all. A year ago, I had been left stranded in Italy with €80 and no plan. Broken, humiliated. Now I stood rooted in a life that was mine, stronger than I had imagined possible. Adrian had tried to break me. He had tried to teach me dependence, to show me what happened when I strayed from his control. But in abandoning me, he had handed me freedom. I realized then that sometimes the cruelest acts become the catalyst for the greatest transformations. The very moment meant to destroy me had set me on the path to my own rebirth. And as I turned back to join the celebration inside, I carried that truth with me, certain now of who I was. Not Adrian's wife, not someone else's accessory, not a shadow. I was Clara, strong, rooted, free. Let me know which city you are watching this from and if you liked my story, so that I can keep bringing more stories like this to you. Thank you so much for your support. I'm looking forward to your comments on my story.